a Hammond guy, a North Township trustee for the better part of 16 years, and now he's sitting in Congress. But right now he's sitting right here in the WJOB Strachan Van Til studios. Frank, thanks for coming in, Congressman.
Thank you very much, Jed. Thank you for all you do. Happy New Year to all of the listeners. Happy, blessed, safe New Year and prosperity. And I'm excited to be here today.
I remember the swearing in of a year ago. I don't know if you called in that day or the next morning or whatever, but it was pretty exciting. I think that we all know the context here, unless you've just moved in from Illinois, like many of you have. And you don't know, but Pete Viscoski was there from, 1984 to 2020. And then Frank took over on the beginning of 2021. And it was quite the change. We had a guy there forever, and then you stepped in. How's the first year gone?
First year has been a learning experience. It's been eventful. It's been challenging. It's been transformational. We've done a lot of good work that I'm proud of. It has been a transition for my wife and my family, my children, my extended family. And I think we are, more wiser, more experienced, and we have this first year underneath our belt. I think that we produced very good, sound results for our district. We stayed district-centric, and I believe we represented the first congressional district very well.
And just a shameless plug, we're moving into some niche programming here this year, and we're trying to take specific topics and giving them their own podcasts. And we will be starting up a podcast tomorrow. We'll be taping it, but you won't get it released for at least a week. And that will be Jane Mrvan, the congressman's wife, and we will be talking about child abuse and sexual abuse and some of the topics that Jane's been involved in, along with some of the local doctors around here. So that kicks off the podcast initiative here for 2022, and that'll be tomorrow. Congressman, we're pretty rough and tumble in terms of politics around here. It's always been that way. It's just, you better be able to get into the ring and go a couple rounds here locally. We all know that. How does that compare to what you're going up against in Washington right now?
Well, I think it's training. People take their government and politics very seriously. And, I was sworn in on the 3rd. On the 6th, we had the insurrection. And so what I took away from that is that we do have a divide in our nation. And I have focused myself on making sure that I can do all that I can to close that divide. I believe that divide exists because workers felt left behind. I believe that divide exists because there's a zero-sum game of winners and losers when it comes to Democrats and Republicans. And I've done everything I could to work across the aisle. There are 11 members of Congress in the state of Indiana, 9 of which who are Republican. I have very solid relationships with them and the 2 United States senators. We have a vested interest as far as the double tracking and the extension of the commuter rail, the South Shore. We have a common interest when it comes to making sure we are prepared for employment. I'm a co-sponsor of the Lost Frontier bill that is all about competing with China with Senator Young. It passed the United States Senate, and in the House, I'm a co-sponsor of it. That allows for 19 different centers, technical centers, technology hubs that will be placed throughout the United States. And I believe that we were able to identify, if Senator Young is a sponsor of that bill, that Indiana will be competitive for one of those technology centers. And so I'm co-sponsoring that bill in an effort to make sure that when it comes to semiconductors and the production of semiconductors, which absolutely is applicable to our supply chain, which is in the ecosystem of the steel industry, because if there aren't chips for the car industry or for the appliance industry, or anything that steel is being made out of, then it slows down production of steel. So to answer your question and not to go too far off the rails, anything I can do to close that divide, to work with whoever I need to work with in order to find solutions, I believe there's an appetite in our country for that. I believe there's an appetite within my district for that, and I've really focused on it. And so you're absolutely right. Washington, D.C. and Congress has its divide and its political fights, as you mentioned, or sometimes it could be a circus. But I'm not there to be outlandish. I'm not there to get tweets. I'm there to come back to deliver for my district, to make sure our economy is working, to make sure that the steel industry is focused on. I'm on education and labor, making sure that we're receiving it, doing all that we can to get our not only our labor force, but we also have bigger issues, which I
We
call
got a really loud motorcycle.
Yeah, that's
going
right.
by, but anyways, yeah.
Victory
keep
for
going.
veterans, right?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, we cannot deny the fact that we also have to talk about kitchen table issues, which I'm going to be focused on this year, helping reduce the inflationary pressures that we have in our economy. It's something that we have to focus on, making sure our supply chain, as I mentioned, the last frontier bill or the competitive bill that we have to compete with China, and also making sure that I continue to focus on and do my job as on Veteran Affairs. As a chairman of a subcommittee of technology modernization, we passed a piece of legislation that focuses on extending benefits for veterans. Collectively, as a member of that committee, I'm very proud that we passed legislation that protects all veterans who were exposed to burn pits and toxic fumes, that they're able to receive benefits. I'm excited about what we're doing in Veteran Affairs when it comes to technology modernization and electronic medical health records, to be able to make sure that veterans receive a world-class healthcare system. And we're going to continue to stay focused and do everything we can to make sure that we're district-centric and delivering for our district.
Now, this position on the Veterans Affairs is no small potatoes. I have, as you met my buddy who is pretty big in the veterans medical field in California, and he keeps texting me. He's like, "When can I talk to that guy? I need to tell him how to fix this problem, and hopefully I'll be able to bring you guys together." But I was looking at some of the congressional records just because there was not a lot to do over the break here. I saw that you were one of two or three freshman congressmen who actually had a bill passed in your first year.
That is correct.
That did feel pretty good.
It did feel it had that sense of accomplishment. For 15 years, as a local elected official, I've done everything I could to make sure that I supported veterans. But more importantly, I listened to them. We put together a veteran service organization, or a commander's roundtable, that I'm very proud of. And they talked about issues that were important to them. And being able to listen and understand what the veterans were in need of, and be able to take that to Washington, D.C., and to be able to put myself in a position to be a chairman of a subcommittee. I feel very fortunate to be able to serve in that regard, and we will stay absolutely focused. But it was a great accomplishment to be able to pass a piece of legislation.
We're talking to Congressman Frank Mrvan III. I'll talk with him for a little bit. We'll take a quick break, and then if you have any questions, you can get them in at 219-845-1100. You can get in line right now if you'd like to call. Congressman, we sat here a year ago, and you related to me that you thought that you would be able to work across the aisle with Republicans, and that it would be an effective strategy. Now, I can honestly say I think maybe half of that has come true, in that, as you well know, Frank and I are like Congressman and I are remotely related, so I had a little bit of candor, and I think I even kind of expressed doubt that was going to be effective at all. You've worked with Senator Young, and you've been able to work for some bipartisan issues, and have kind of, from what I understand, positioned yourself as someone willing to work across the aisle. But to some extent, the doubt that I had then is kind of a similar doubt now, that it's just not going to happen, as much as you guys want to close the divide. And I've had the same conversation with Senator Young. It's like, you guys, obviously Frank Mrvan wants to work across the aisle. You want to work across the aisle. But it's just so difficult to make it happen. And I just don't see a lot of hope that that's going to change all that much in 2022. What would you like to see change so that guys like Senator Young and you would be able to work towards solutions? Well,
you're right. We cannot hide from the fact that we have a strong political system that is divided, clearly divided. And there's many, many different factors that go into that. I could give you examples of what we have accomplished. The infrastructure bill, 40% of the Senate voted for the infrastructure bill. It's very important to me. I've talked about it for 2 years, how important the infrastructure bill is as far as roads, bridges, waterways, what we would do for Northwest Indiana, how it allows us to compete globally when it comes to the supply chain for ports, for airports, to be able to move things logistically. And if we're investing in our infrastructure, to be able to have clean water, to be able to replace the pipes that are lead throughout all of Northwest Indiana, throughout all of the 1st Congressional District, the state of Indiana, what we have to remember is, as the chairman or co-chairman of the Steel Caucus, which I take great pride in, and my mission to make sure that we protect and advance the steel industry. And when we're doing that, with the infrastructure bill, we have strong Buy American provisions. So there'll be steel that will be used for the roads and for the bridges and for the pipes and for the waterways. And when we're doing that, our economy will have certainty for the next 10 years. There'll be certainty. So your question was about bipartisanship, and I'm going to get back to that.
To come back to that is like, basically, yeah, you have still attempted, and you've had some successes with it.
So,
but
okay,
I'm still pretty cynical about that strategy.
We are facing an election cycle, right? Mm-hmm. And so there'll be more divide. And as I mentioned, I want to make sure that I emphasize this. Very often, we look at things as a zero-sum game of wins and losses for Democrats and Republicans. What we have to look at is how I perceive it is, what is a victory for the 1st Congressional District? The infrastructure bill. What is a victory for the 1st Congressional District is when I go to Veteran Affairs, which is a very bipartisan committee, and we work together in order to pass legislation to protect veterans, to advance health care, to make sure they get world-class health care. When I'm on education and labor, I have communications. See, it's not romantic, and it's not on the news when we work together. There are bipartisan bills that come out of education and labor that are to make sure that our workforce has the apprenticeship program, and there's programming dollars to make sure that we're educating and having equitable opportunities for people to participate in our economy. That's a bipartisan approach. And as I mentioned earlier, there are 9 other members of Congress. Greg Pence and I sat down when I very first came to Congress. He was a gentleman, and he said, we can work together for the state of Indiana. I believe that, and he believes that. And so when it came to partnering up on a piece of legislation that enhanced the expansion of broadband for rural and urban areas, we signed on to that together. And so you're right. We're going to face an election, and I'm going to be in a position. I'm a proud Democrat. I believe that as a Democrat, I can make the greatest impact for my district. But when I was a North Township trustee, when people came into, and I did this for 15 years, when people came into my office or when I went into their homes when they were facing a disaster, I didn't ask what they were, what party affiliation they might be. I took care of business. And I believe that's the same thing that a member of Congress has to do. If someone contacts me and they have a suggestion or an issue, or if they have a constituent issue with the IRS, with the immigration, with Veteran Affairs, with any federal program that we can assist, we do it. So you are absolutely correct. There is going to be an election that is going to be Democrat versus Republican, but I believe that there's an appetite for individuals to go out there to not only reach across the aisle, to listen to every constituency that they have, but to be able to find solutions to what our needs are in the 1st Congressional District, in the state of Indiana, and in our nation. Our issues are bigger than that.
Well, I agree with you. There is an appetite. I mean, all you got to do is look here. I mean, what we do every morning, whether people realize it or not, is not replicated in very many other areas. And I talk to other people in other areas, and it's like, no, your radio station's one way or the other, and people don't really come together, kind of like we do in the morning. I just, Congressman, that I like to have hope that we can come together. I just don't see any evidence other than non-sexy bills that on the major issues of our time that we're meeting minds. And it just, if you can offer hope to the women in North Hammond that are listening to you very intently right now for every little nuance of what you're saying. They want hope. I agree with that. It's just that sometimes on the national level, I have difficulty handing it to them.
And it may be difficult to hand that hope to them, right? So I guess the best explanation that I can give my constituents in North Hammond who are listening is that my deeds match what I'm talking about. How I navigate through Congress and how I come back to my district, my home, is how I conduct myself on both manners. And so all I can tell is give you the proof is in the pudding, or in North Hammond, the proof is in the pierogi. When you're making
why
it.
don't you leave the comedy to like people who get like Tony Panic?
Fair enough.
Leave that to Tony Panic and Rick Kubik, if you would.
Fair enough.
But nice try.
Thank you.
I understand what you're saying, and that you have. If I have to look back on the last year, because I was like, come on, Frank, you're going to really try to go to Congress and you're going to try to reach across the aisle. These people, there's people in Washington that eat their young, and they've drawn a line. You've been consistent about that. I just don't know, as if, other than the non-sexy stuff, how effective that would be on the major issues of our day.
Correct.
Including COVID, including foreign relations, including social programs. I would love to be sitting here next year doing the same thing, if you win your election or whatever, saying, gosh, you know what? My cynicism of 2022 is just turned around entirely to a brighter future when we are coming together to face our challenges.
And the battle that I'm fighting is not a partisan battle. The battle that I'm fighting is for working men and women. And I believe that. That's why I'm on the Steel Caucus. That's why I'm on education and labor. That's why I want to make sure that our workforce is where it can possibly be to have equitable opportunities, which means that there's opportunities in our economy for all individuals, no matter what your race or creed or religion is that I, as a member of Congress, of creating opportunities to do that. You talk about COVID-19, we're peaking right now. I went into the ERs on New Year's Eve to be able to speak and thank our healthcare workers.
You're one of the few people, because almost everybody's on bypass, right?
Correct.
Or a lot of people are, but you were able to get in. But anyway, to visit.
I dropped off pizzas in appreciation for what they were doing, and to explain to them, thank you for moving us forward, and to wish them a happy 22. They've carried the weight of life and death for the last 2 years, emotionally, physically. And it is important for me to know firsthand not only what they are going through, but to see what our facilities are going through. You mentioned COVID and what that meant. When I was there and I visited St. Catherine's in East Chicago, I went to Methodist in Gary, I went to Community in Munster, Franciscan in Munster, Franciscan in Dyer. I went to Porter Northwest Health. And the common thread was that people are still suffering. And there were countless people who were there. And so I do kind of want to emphasize that if you're in the middle of the road and you have not been vaccinated yet, to consider being vaccinated just by the pressures that's being placed upon our healthcare system. 40% of our ICUs are taken up by people with COVID, and 90% of those individuals have not been vaccinated. So if you want to help your community and be able to create an opportunity for individuals to have access to health care, your neighbor, and I mean this wholeheartedly, if you want to reduce your risk, all I'm asking you to do right now is to consider, to look at the data, to look at the science, to realize that millions of people have been vaccinated, and it makes your risk level reduce. So I'm just asking you to consider it. Based on the science and the data, because these are very, very contagious times. And there were capacities in those hospitals that were filled. So to the doctors, to the janitors, to the maintenance workers, to the receptionists, I went there to thank them because how important it is. Now, I believe, on the theme of what we're talking about, that this isn't a partisan issue. This is science and data and healthcare and health commissioners and physicians and people who have studied this and infectious disease doctors. They're the ones who are leading us on this. I speak very frequently to Dr. West, who's an infectious disease doctor at Franciscan. And early on, before Thanksgiving, her and I had a phone conversation. She said, I anticipate a peak. The trajectory is showing that we are going to peak because people are getting together, and it is because of the Omicron. This is going to happen, and it has. So I went there to thank them. I went there to show my appreciation as a member of Congress and to be able to carry back what they had to say. And ultimately, the message was for the community to consider getting vaccinated if you're in the middle of the road, because the percentage of people who are filling our hospitals and putting pressure on our healthcare systems are unvaccinated.
219-845-1100. I won't take a break. We'll just go right in. If you got a question, get it out. You guys know how it works. When I don't have guests, I go to the washroom and I come back and you're still talking. But when somebody's here, please have respect. Get your question out and we'll move on. 219-845-1100. Let's go to MX on line 599. MX, you're on with Congressman Frank Mrvan III. Go ahead.
Good morning, Congressman Mrvan. Did you question Joe Biden why he lifted the tariffs on the Europe? What tariffs to me is dumping a steel. Did you question him on that?
All right, thank you.
Thank you, MX.
Let's go straight to steel. By the way, Jim Morton and Scott Letnich were in here right before I left, and they're doing a podcast also on steel, and we will be releasing that also, and they went straight at this topic. Steel in the world right now, the situation is?
Steel in the world. So as I mentioned, I am co-chair of the Steel Caucus, which is roughly about 100 members, bipartisan members of the U.S. House. Representative Bost out of Illinois, Representative Crawford, who's the Republicans, myself, and Connor Lamb are the four co-chairs. First and foremost, we sent early on, and I spoke on the House floor, a letter to the president with the backing of the Steel Caucus to the Biden administration, saying that what we needed to do, again, in a bipartisan effort, collectively we came together as a Steel Caucus to talk about this and to put forth this effort to make sure that the Section 232, which the previous administration had put in place to protect and advance the steel industry as a national security measure. So the steel that builds our battleships, our tanks, our airplanes is made in the United States of America. The last thing we want to do is be dependent upon foreign nations or bad actors. What you also have is you have bad actors when it comes to trade, such as China, such as North Korea, such as other places throughout the world, that what they do is they subsidize their steel. What I mean by subsidize, the government pays for their electricity bill, which makes the steel cheaper. And so they subsidize the steel. China dumps a lot of cheap steel into the market, drives our market down, our price down. And what that does is reduce the amount of United Steelworkers who are working because they're producing less steel because the market is flooded with low steel. It also has a climate environmental issue because our steel mills are operating to make sure we have clean air and clean water. Other steel mills throughout the world don't have those same standards. So MX question is very specific. What did I do to talk to the Biden administration about the negotiations with the EU when it came to the steel industry? As a caucus, we monitored it. We made sure that the administration was aware that we wanted an end result that protected the steel industry. The steel workers were at the table. The United Steelworkers supported that effort to allow good actors, not punishing bad actors, good actors to be able to participate in the steel market. So MX is absolutely correct. The Biden administration negotiated with the EU to allow them to produce steel and to open up our economy when it comes to that. It was absolutely in an effort with the United Steelworkers and the steel industry, and the American Pipe and Steel Institute endorsed it. Mr. Dempsey talked about it. And what we're doing is we're holding the Biden administration. I'm not a cheerleader for anyone. I'm a separate entity of the government. I'm the legislative branch. My job is not to be a cheerleader for anyone or to always criticize past administrations or administration. My job is to make sure that the steel industry thrives, so that the steel workers are working, so that we're producing our economy, so that on Main Street here, Angie's Cafe in Maryville, those steel workers are still showing up for breakfast.
All right, I'm going to move you along
Yes.
because obviously as co-chair of the Steel Caucus, we can go into a lot of details there.
Correct.
And I know that we want to get you on one of the shows with Jim
Absolutely.
Morton and talk about that. And we will go deeper into the steel stuff. But we got a few minutes left, so I'm going to move it through. Let's go to Dave from Gary on line 599. Hey, Dave.
Good morning, Jed. Good morning, Congressman. The transportation industry and shortage of goods and services have been in the news, obviously, for the last year and a half. And the American people this is one of the largest economies on the planet, did a lot of pointing and clicking and decimated the supply chain, which is not uncommon because that's what I do. But it's also a matter of national security. Those semiconductor chips that go into all these airplanes and ships and cars come from abroad. Those are American transnational corporations. Is there anything started to really put a pinpoint on? This is a matter of national security, our transportation, and not just money.
All right, thank you. Great question. Obviously, we cover it on a regular basis, Congressman. Transportation
Right,
shortage is really what this question's about.
Right, exactly. And so we flip to education and labor, making sure that people who have CDL licenses are out in the world, right? We want to make sure that there's equitable opportunities. So transportation, when we talk about the infrastructure bill, there are dollars that are placed into the infrastructure bill to advance our ports, to expand upon them, to be able to make sure that the workforce is delivering, to be able to get those ships off of the coast of LA into the port, to be able to move those ships. It's got to do with rail, making sure that the infrastructure bill is investing in rail and the expansion. I sit on a commission with Marcy Kaptur, who is the chairwoman for natural resources. We sit on a Great Lakes commission together. We're focused on and are meeting on how we expedite rail from LA through Ohio and Cleveland and beyond, making sure that the congestion in Chicago is fixed so that we can move products back and forth so that Dave from Gary could pick up his shipment and be able to move it. So the supply chain is absolutely an issue.
What about the shortage of drivers and of, quite frankly, all these unions around here that, you see the signs when you walk in. This is building trade sponsored media as much as any in America. And they're all up against their limits right now. Dave right now calls in on a regular basis. We're down, 100,000 drivers right now?
Well,
what are you going to do about that?
Great question. First and foremost, I want to put things in a time perspective. So as a North Township trustee, and I'm glad that I remembered this, I would say 8 to 10 years ago, there's always been in our economy, which is we have lots of products that we have to move. As a North Township trustee, we provided 10 individuals, and it was documented because we did a newspaper article, the opportunity to get their CDL license. So we helped them with their become self-sufficient. We worked with them. We worked with a school out of, I believe it was East Chicago or Hammond, and we tried to get drivers. The reason we did that is because 8 to 10 years ago, there was a great shortage in truck drivers. That is a very difficult, challenging job, over-the-road truck drivers. So your question is, to hold my feet to the fire, what are you going to do about that? So in the Build Back Better bill, and also the apprenticeship program where we passed the PRO Act, prior to passing the PRO Act, we passed in funding for the apprenticeship programs to put dollars forward to be able to move people to that industry to be able to fill that. When it comes to apprenticeship programs, to ask your question directly, so the laborers, and I don't want to leave anyone out.
Don't even start naming them because
all of the trades.
Yeah, there you go. That's better.
So that they have the program dollars to be able to move people, and we also create equitable opportunities for all individuals, men, women, of every color and every creed within Northwest Indiana to be able to participate in our economy. So voting for those pieces of legislation is what I have done. Locally, I've sat down with Lisa Doherty, who's in charge of Work One, who I served with on United Way, and have those relationships. How do we move people? How do we become more efficient? How, as a legislator, can I help workforce development to participate here in Northwest Indiana to be able to train and move people forward? I'm going to continue to meet with Lisa Doherty to figure out how we can do that in a collective way so that the Lake, Porter, LaPorte County, and the 5 counties in Northwest Indiana are prepared to do that. Secondly, I want to talk about the American Rescue Plan. The American Rescue Plan brought in program dollars to Northwest Indiana. First and foremost, I'm very proud that the majority of all cities and towns and counties within my 1st congressional district are using the American Rescue Plan for first responders to make sure that they receive bonuses, to make sure that they have the proper equipment. So the American Rescue Plan, which I voted for, supported, and we passed, not only went to the cities and towns and governments to be able to support what they're going through the pandemic, to find out what we need to do to move forward through this year and next year, it also allowed for the schools transformational investments.
Well, a lot of that investment also is, as I think when you were at North Township, but we talked about college isn't for everyone, and a lot of these people have to be shown that, hey, you can go into driving a truck and making that money. And
That's
I know
correct.
that in the Build Back Better has a lot of money for that.
Correct.
Right now.
And so did the American Rescue Plan.
Yes.
It went into the schools. So you want to talk about trades?
We're still short truck drivers.
I understand. Yeah. And people are going back into the workforce. But also remember, we're at the peak of a pandemic. That affects our economy. We have to logically look at that. And my wife, Jane, talks about this. The economy also has shifted where people are trying to work on their schedules and in their way. And it will eventually, I believe, work its way through that people will get back to work. That's why.
And speaking of schedules, I know that the guy out there who is kind of the velvet hammer is trying to move us along here. We got a bunch of people that want to talk to you. So I'm going to make it a little quicker here. Let's go to the next phone call. And, hey, you're on the air. Go ahead. You're on with Frank Mrvan.
Hey, it's great that you went and visited the hospitals. I'm glad that there were still some workers there who weren't fired because they weren't vaccinated. But will Joe Biden require that illegal aliens entering our country be vaccinated or at least screened for COVID before they infect the rest of our country?
Thank you for the question. Thank you. Let's go to immigration. Here, personally, I prefer undocumented workers. I don't like that term, but where are we on this?
So consistently, I have said that when it comes to immigration, it's a matter of national security. We all want to live in a safe nation, in a safe state, in a safe community. And so ultimately, as you mentioned, we want to make sure people who are coming into our country who are undocumented, we want to make sure that they are coming in the proper way. So when it comes to protecting our borders, using technology, using what we need to do to make sure that all who are entering undocumented or seeking asylum are registered and doing that. I am for moving in that direction. I also believe that we have to have a human approach towards it, and we have to continue on the undocumented, when people are coming undocumented, making sure that we're doing it the proper way for citizenship, a pathway to citizenship. I also want to make sure that I emphasize that I believe that people are coming here to seek economic opportunity as they always have. The steel mills in our area have brought people from all over the world for generations to be able to make a living and to be able to provide for their family. I also believe that opportunity should still exist, done the proper way, when we make sure we have a national security comprehensive immigration policy. That saying, I also believe an emphasis on e-verification, making sure businesses and small businesses are hiring individuals who are documented is extremely important, because people are coming here to make sure that they are able to have a part of the American dream. So those processes are in place, and we need to work towards that.
Speaking of the process, I think his question was, should people coming in legally be forced to get vaccinated? I don't know if that's a thing right now or not.
As I'm talking about, as he mentioned, I went to the ERs and we talked about how important it was to get vaccinated because of the pressures that are on the healthcare system. I have to look into that also. I don't know if there's a policy in place. But again,
I'm pretty sure. I think
consider,
it already is.
I want all
I
people.
think Mark would know. Is it already in? I mean, we'll get back. I'll get the information on that. Let's move on. We're going to take one more phone call, and then we're going to. The congressman's got to go. I know the other 5 people waiting. There's a time limit here, and we've already gone past it. So let's take one more phone call. Hey, you're on the air. How are you? Hello.
Good morning, Jed. Congressman, this is Jim from Munster. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Jim.
Hey, listen, I host the Steel Talk Show, and we can't thank you enough for your support. You do a fantastic job, and my comment is just continue to fight for the region as a congressman in your position in the Steel Caucus, and do everything you can to support fair trade. We're all about fair trade. We want to trade. I just spent last week in California, and it's unbelievable the amount of ships and rail that are out in Long Beach and Los Angeles. There is a lot of material, a lot of goods coming in from Asia. We need those goods. They drive our economy, but it just needs to be fair trade, and that's all we ask for. So if you have a chance to sit in Washington, just bring that region hammer and continue to support us. And thank you for everything that you do. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks a lot, Jim. Congressman, final comments.
Final comment specifically to what Jim was talking about. I'm proud to be on the Steel Caucus. My grandfather was a steel worker. My father just brought that up on Christmas. How proud he is of the fact that we're representing the steel workers and continuing to make them thrive. And as a member of Congress, he hit the nail on the head. I want to make sure that we have trade policies that protect the American workers, that protect the American steel workers, that protect our domestic manufacturing so that we have opportunities for those who do not want to go to college. And so at the Steel Caucus, as I mentioned, not only are we doing what we can to make sure that the steel industry is thriving, but we're making sure that there are fair trade policies, none of which have passed this year, to protect our domestic manufacturing, to protect our steel industry. I've testified in front of the International Trade Commission 4 times, protecting workers, talking about how important it is that this company or this entity is breaking trade laws and why we have to stop that. I testified as a member of Congress to prevent that. The problem is that that's too late. People have already lost jobs. And as a trustee, I witnessed that when the tin mill closed, we had over 130 individuals who lost their jobs because the aluminum and tin market went under probably about 6 years ago. And they took it as a trade case. That's too late. So we have to have strong trade laws to protect American manufacturing, to protect American trade, to the American steel industry. And that's why I'm there. That's why I'm there every single day. And that's why I'm a co-chair of the Steel Caucus, is in order to protect that and advance those types of industries so that we can thrive.
Congressman, on January 6th, we plan on playing a year-old interview of you when you got back from Washington, came straight over here, and reflected on what happened on January 6th. Anything you want to say to the region as we move into kind of a painful anniversary?
So, as that 1 year approaches, my whole approach towards that is to close the divide. And I mean that wholeheartedly. I was there. I lived it. I was on the House floor. I went through those moments, and I've moved forward. And I've moved forward in a sense that I've identified that we have a divide in our nation so that workers can't be left behind. My deeds talk about what I'm doing for our men and women who are in the labor force, creating opportunities and equitable opportunities so people aren't left behind. But there are still difficult conversations to make sure that we have to be able to close the isms, which I think is a big part of it: racism, sexism, different religions. That is absolutely in play in our nation. And so as a member of Congress, what can I do to eliminate that? Is to make sure I call it out when I see it, and to make sure that I carry myself in a way that doesn't allow for that. And so that divide exists, and it still does. But if we can create opportunities, equitable opportunities when it comes to our economy, to create jobs, and to be able to close that by understanding what other people are going through, then I think we'll be in a better place. And again, I've talked about this is the third time that I've mentioned it. It is not a zero-sum win game for Democrats and Republicans. It is what is the issue at hand? How do we solve that as a federal government? How, as a member of Congress, can I do that? If we look at through that lens, granted, I may be alone and walk alone for a while. The fact of the matter is if I do that, we'll help close that divide. So as a nation, do we have a lot of healing to do from what happened on the January 6th? Absolutely. I think in order to protect our democracy, we need to ask the questions, how did it happen? When did it happen? Why did it happen? And once we have those answers, then we continue to move forward as a nation. And I'm going to stay focused on my district and stay focused on the issues, as I talked about, our kitchen table issues, inflationary pressures, supply chain, making Northwest Indiana an economic opportunity that everyone wants throughout the world wants to come to when we talk about technology, when we talk about steel, when we talk about our small businesses. Those are my emphases. So yes, I lived through it. It's the year anniversary. We move forward.
Let's leave it right there. Thanks a lot to Congressman Frank Mrvan III. Stay right where you're at. We'll be right back on the Voice and Face of the Region.